series of readings for each Sunday. It's a gospel lesson, and then usually another New Testament lesson, an Old Testament lesson, and a psalm. And they're designed for each Sunday of the year, and it's a 3-year cycle. So once every 3 years, the cycle then begins to repeat itself again. I normally preach from the text that's assigned for that particular Sunday, and I do it for several reasons, but one of the main reasons I do it is because it forces me into texts that I wouldn't usually want to preach on. Things that I would normally kind of set aside and maybe focus on something else, things that make me uncomfortable or are hard to preach on. Well, every now and then those things come back to bite you. This is one of those texts that for me is very difficult to preach on. It's a text that I've wrestled with all week, and I imagine that a lot of people, as they read their Gospels, get to this text. Not everybody, but a lot of people get to this text and kind of read through it kind of quickly, shake their head a little bit, and move on. When you're preaching on a text, you can't do that. So several times this week, as I wrestled with the text, getting ready for this church hour, if you will, I only half teasingly focused on verse 27 and said to myself, now my soul is troubled, and what should I say? Father, save me from this hour? Well, no. It's for this reason that I come to preach. So here we are. We've come to a point in Jesus' life where he has finally said that the hour has come. I don't know if you recall, but in several places in the Gospel of John and in the other Gospels, but in the Gospel of John, Jesus has said the hour is not here yet. This is not the hour. In chapter 2, verse 4, when he's at the wedding of Cana of Galilee, when his mother asks him to do something about the fact that they've run out of wine, Jesus says, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come. In chapter 7, he's about to be arrested by people, by the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and the text says they tried to arrest him, but no one laid hands on him because his hour had not yet come. One time in the temple, when we're in chapter 8, verse 20, it says that no one arrested him because his hour had not yet come. Now, finally, Jesus announces that his hour has come. It is the time for him to be glorified. He has raised Lazarus from the grave, and the whole world comes seeking Jesus. Remember, the text starts with some Greeks came looking for Jesus. And that really impresses upon us the fact that now it's not only the Jews that are in Jerusalem, in that area to which he's preaching, that are coming to him, but it's outsiders, it's Gentiles, it's different people are coming. And to him, this is a sign, to Jesus, this is a sign that it's now the time for him to do what he has to do. The problem is that in order for him to be glorified, in order for Jesus to deliver his life-giving gift to the world, he must die. I think one of the reasons that this text is so difficult for me is that it's filled with some paradoxical statements. There's some hyperbole in here as well. Hyperbole, again, is an extreme statement, an extreme exaggeration in order to direct your attention to a point that's being made. There's hyperbole in here, certainly, but there's also some paradox in here. I looked up paradox to make sure I was using the word right. And it's got 4 definitions. The one that I think fits this the best is a statement or proposition that seems self-contradictory or absurd, but in reality expresses a possible truth. One of the paradoxes that work here in this text, in the context of this text, where this text is seated, is that those who have gathered together to cheer with loud hosannas, this Jesus, the Christ, this prophet, this rabbi, will soon be the same voices that are yelling, crucify him, when Good Friday comes. I guess the term Good Friday is also a paradox. We call Good Friday, the Friday that Jesus is nailed to the cross, we claim is good. Of course, we as Christians know why we claim it is good, but it is kind of paradoxical that we would say Good Friday about the death of someone. Jesus, knowing that this crowd that is now singing loud hosannas, now yelling for this Christ, now having the Pharisees and the Sadducees so worried that soon shalt crucify him. Jesus, knowing this, says, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Now this may sound like simple earth science to those of us who live in a scientific world, but think of the power of these words. A seed cannot reach its potential unless it is buried in the ground, unless it dies, unless it is covered with earth. Only then can it become something else. Only then can it become what God has intended it to be. Jesus uses this statement to talk about himself, to talk about the fact that he must be buried in the ground, that he must die, that he must become something other than what we see right there, right then. A man walking on the earth. That he must be glorified, to become all that God has called him to be. And yet, it's not just about Jesus, but it's also about those who would follow him. Isn't this the same thing he was telling Nicodemus, just using slightly different words? When he told Nicodemus that in order to see the kingdom, in order to be a part of that kingdom, you must be born again. You must be transformed. You must be renewed. You must be changed from top to bottom. You have to be different than you are now. Jesus chooses to use the analogy of death and seeds to make this point again in his last hours. He talks about the fact that we have to be something completely different than we are now. That we must die in order to be reborn. But who among us wants to die? Who in their right mind would want to die? Change is difficult, stressful, scary. It's hard to think of being something different than we are now. And Jesus is not just calling us for a little bit of change. He's not just challenging us to change one or two habits. He's calling us to a radical change. Again, which he says cannot happen unless we are born again, unless we die with him, the symbol of baptism, die with Christ, and are raised again to new life. As I said before, who in the right mind would want to die? In fact, in my military career, I spent a lot of time training and teaching about suicide awareness and prevention. We are worried, and there's something wrong with somebody who is seeking to die, who is so discouraged by life, and that life is so futile for them, and they see no hope, that we have to have people in place who are trained to look out for these kind of symptoms, that we might rescue them. So what a paradoxical statement we have when Jesus says the one who loves their life loses it. And those who hate their life in this world will keep it for eternity. That's not how we picture it when we look at suicide prevention. We look at those who seem to hate life, who can't stand how they're living, what's going on with them, who see no hope as